Name is Cody Peck. I have my business partner in here too, Elliott and Magri. We tend to work with a variety of businesses, everything from someone starting out in a startup, where a lot of you guys are, to medium-sized businesses on some different strategies that we talk about, or exit strategies based off of some research that we've done and talking to a few of the people at Innovation Tech Park. We figured we'll hit a little bit more on the M&A side, because that's probably where most of your businesses will go into. Talk about IPOs and some specs throughout this presentation.
The three main options that I think most of you will probably see is either a merger and acquisition, initial public offering, which that's usually small businesses, like we made it goal. We really made it. We created something great. You take it public for retail investors to purchase shares, or a SPAC, or a special acquisition company. Next slide. And so we'll get started with merger and acquisition. It's also known as an M&A deal. Now, there is no set standard M&A deal. They vary. Every deal varies in a sense from each other. And really the reason that a buyer would be looking to acquire your company, I'm going to use pharmaceuticals because I think it's a really, really good example. They're either looking for the company leadership that you have to acquire and bring on board, or the business as a whole. And so there's three types of deals. There's horizontal M&A, which is where pharmaceutical company A is buying pharmaceutical company B. You sell the same thing. You're at the same area in the supply chain. The old saying, if you can't beat them, you buy them. Then there's vertical M&A. That's like a pharmaceutical company buying the chemical company that they purchased the chemicals to create their pharmaceuticals from. So it's purchasing a company that's at a different point in the supply chain. And the reason that a company would do that is to have more control over that supply chain as a whole. If you own the chemical company that all the pharmaceutical companies purchase their chemicals from, you can control the delegation of those chemicals. And then really anything that falls outside either horizontal or vertical acquisitions is just called a conglomerate. Most of the time you see that like something completely unrelated for your industry, or a geographical difference, something in a different country. So those are the three main deals that you'll see. And really, I'm going to walk through the deal process from the buyer side, and the seller side will be touched on here, but this is just a really, really 50,000 feet overview. It is a very intricate process. These deals can take years and years to go through, but from a foundational standpoint, this just gives you an outline of what buyers are looking for, the process of purchasing and acquiring a company. So the first step is the acquisition strategy. So you have a firm that's looking to acquire, a horizontal acquisition. Too much market share is being eaten up by a competitor. So what's the buyer looking for? Hey, the market share that we're in is being usurped by company B over here. So our goal is to have more control of that market share. So this acquisition company is digging into their finances and also market share to see what's going on. So then step two, they're going to start researching, who's eating up that market share. What do we need in regards to supply chains? The search for a company to acquire starts. And that boils down to two levels. Number one, a business criteria. Are we having issues with supply chain? Okay, then we need to buy company X. Or are our financials hurting? Do we need to boost up? Sorry, I got a question here. Do you want me to answer these questions as they come in, or finish and then we'll address them? All right, we'll just finish.
We'll look at them when we're
Sorry,
done.
I am eating, Elliott. Yeah, if you want to just go through this and then we'll address the questions at the end.
Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
So step two, financial, companies are looking to boost their finances, especially if they have any sort of shareholders. Step 3 is from the buyer side. They do a long list search. So they might generate 500 companies on this long list that they could potentially acquire. And so this is just like your broad base, who could we potentially acquire quick, skim over. These are the companies that fit in our search criteria. Next slide. And then so from that long list search, they're going to narrow it down, especially the buying firm's going to narrow it down to 2 or 3 companies. And that's when they make their initial approach. And typically they'll have some sort of advisor with them. So company A is going to approach company B and see if company B, 1, is even interested in selling. And 2, if they are interested in selling, the big reason is why. And the why factors into the price. Is the company doing well, or is it on financial turbulence right now? So step 5 is where they start to evaluate the company. That's when you have to open your books. This is where you open the books, and most of the time the sellers don't disclose any sort of skeletons in the closet, but from a brief overview you can see financially how the company is doing. And the business is always valued on a standalone basis. It's really challenging to value leadership, that there's no price for that. So that's where negotiations will come in, which is step 6. You negotiate an LOI, or a letter of intent. And this is where an offer is considered. And this is where then the selling company will give over everything, because this is the due diligence side of the buying firm. And this is where all the skeletons in the closet do come out. And this is the most lengthy process of the whole process, because this buying firm's got to make sure there's nothing that's going to come back and get them. There was no fraud. There was no negligence. There's no pending lawsuit, any sort of thing that could bite them for purchasing a company and acquiring one. And so the due diligence, these analysts at the buying firm are going to be going through every number, fact checking, looking at receipts, pending lawsuits, looking at product, looking at trials. They're really doing their due diligence to make sure that this letter of intent is going to sustain the value that they've negotiated. So step 8 is that sale and purchase contract. This is, okay, we've done our due diligence. Everything comes out good. We've agreed on a price. This is how we're going to sell it. You're going to buy it, and you sign a contract. This is done with a team of lawyers. And step 9, really on the buyer side of things, is how are they going to finance it? Are they going to give the seller cash? Are they going to give them shares? Again, this is where the variety comes in. There's 1,000 different ways to do it, but that's how you're paid as a seller. And then step 10 is the closing, finalizing the deal and the post-deal implementation. So if there's like a time frame on the buyout, they're buying a percentage. Again, we're getting into the variance area, but that's pretty much the whole M&A deal process from a 50,000 feet overview. We're going to move into initial public offering and IPO, which Cody's going to cover.
So we're looking at, in each one of these, we have to look at, how is a business valued overall. So there's equity, enterprise value, equity, all the assets of a company to common equity of investors. That would be also cash put in from investors. Then we also are talking about really, enterprise. What are the core operations? How much equity is in the company? How much cash is in the company? How much cash flow is the company doing? All of this will play into a role of how to evaluate the company. And the different different industries for companies are valued differently based off of what they have in them. So certain industries, such as pharmaceuticals and tech, they're going to be looked at very differently than if you're looking at a company like John Deere or Caterpillar, because what's happening there is, if you're going to acquire a pharmaceutical company, you're acquiring that research and development department, that other tech company who's looking to develop a product where they might have put in a lot of cost and you're not really seeing the cash flow in there. So you have to evaluate that company very differently than if you were to evaluate like a John Deere or Caterpillar, where they're making equipment. So you're going to be looking at how many plants do they have, how much can they put out, do they control the whole supply chain? And those are a few of the different ways to go into the evaluation period. We're not going to spend actually a whole lot of how to evaluate the business, because it varies from business to business and also can vary in any type of deal you decide what you want to do. So even in the M&A process, they can evaluate the same type of business in the same industry 2 different ways. And going into the initial public offering, the IPO, where everyone really is wanting to be, they hear about it, you know, the Facebooks, the Apples, the Teslas, you know, get in there when it's cheap and buy into this company. It actually can be a very lengthy process. There's a lot of regulations into this. You could be talking about years to actually get a public offering open, especially if your company's not structured to go to a public offering right off the bat, aka a C Corp. So really one of the first steps is, if you want to go into a public offering, you need to make sure your company is set up. So we're talking about you're set up as a C Corp right now. You're going to go out and look for an investment banker. Investment bankers, basically what they're going to do is underwrite your IPO. It's not like underwriting as in insurance underwriting. It's underwriting as in they agree to help you raise the money and sell the shares. They do take a commission off of it. So that could be 3 to 5% or more, or a flat fee. It all depends. Now we're going to go into looking to start filing a registration statement with the SEC. This is going to be really a big process in these kind of step 2, step 3. As you start going through, you have to make sure you have all your financials in order. So if you're going to go through this process, you want to make sure you have your balance sheets in order, your cash flow analysis, all those financial sheets in order. You're going to have to prove that. You're going to be meeting with the investment banker. You're going to be finding out the value of everything. You're going to be filing all these different papers. And when I mean papers, I'm talking about mountains of paperwork with the SEC. To make sure you line into all these different laws. Step 3, after the SEC says, hey, looks like you're good, we can start moving forward, you're going to create a prospectus. This is basically a little, think of it as a little pamphlet you're going to pass out to prospective investors. Usually you start with institutional investors and work your way down. And there's a variety of different things that you can put out there, tombstone ads, different ads like that, to try to generate what type of feedback people are liking for your business. So how many people want to actually invest into your business? And then comes to setting the IPO price. And that's going to be looking at the value of the company you established it at. What is the cut the investment banker is going to be taking from it? Also, what is the amount of capital you need to be raising here? And then essentially, as long as all those things line up, you will go into an IPO. Typically, you're talking about a 2-year process to launch. Now, going into a SPAC. The reason we're putting the SPAC behind an IPO and a merger and acquisition is it's essentially an IPO and an M&A all in one. And so what happens at the beginning of it is you'll hear of SPACs. You've probably heard a lot of them coming out in the last few years because they become a lot more popular. They've actually been around for decades. What happens is at the beginning portion, a group of investors and board get together and decide we're going to create a blank check company, investment company, essentially, that does an IPO to raise money, to raise X amount of money. And you're buying into the ability of that person to eventually buy some type of company that has not been public yet at all. And so they raise X amount of money It could be 200 million, a billion, whatever it is. Once they hit that goal, they usually have a year to come out. From your perspective, you're not part of that IPO on that end. You're going to be part of, as the business owners, part of the M&A process of going in public. So that company, for the board and the investors, will go out and find companies they want to invest in. When they go into investing, they approach you. Essentially, they say, hey, we want to take your company public. Back and forth, you would prepare to do a merger and acquisition for part of the company, while essentially merging the companies to go into a private entity. Usually somewhere around 30% of the company shares will be going public in this mix. And even if you guys do agree, the investors of essentially the SPAC have to agree that they want to take your company public and merge. So from your perspective, instead of taking 2 years, this can get done really about, maybe 5 months. If everything goes smoothly, you merge with the other company. The company brings in the capital, usually an agreed amount that you take over. The investment people take their cut, and then you go public. This is come under a lot more scrutiny over the last 2 years as it's picked up stuff. So the SEC is reviewing the rules and regulations right now. So there's some things that might be changing in the details here overall, but that would be essentially how a SPAC would go. And we're going to dive into kind of some of your questions, see what your feedback is, what your thought processes are on kind of these high level overviews, and then we can dive a little bit deeper for you guys overall.